Edward.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Wanted to thank all y'all for coming. We do have a couple people, I think, online. Again, just to kind of go over some logistics in the beginning here. There will be an online segment for the next two. So this meeting, the next meeting will be a lot of just information and kind of general discussion. And so that'll be available as a live online, and we'll provide the recordings and then copies of these presentations. The first one and this one and the next one to the committee. I'll email those to you directly. So if you're still on the committee as we go forward. This will be a lot less formal of a meeting than the previous one. So certainly as we go through it, if you have questions, feel free to stop me. There's about 20 or so slides of data that we're going to go through today. Just try to give you some high level information. The bulk of this meeting will be kind of about, will be a lot more about how or what existing conditions exist in the Northgate area. So again, Northgate proper, all the way over to North Point Crossing, Hensel Park, Century Square. So as we go through this, if there's particular levels of information that the committee wants to see, we can go back and find that. So if there's you want to get a little bit more granular with the data, let us know. We can go find that. If there's something that we don't have listed that you might think would be an important aspect of the conversation going forward, certainly let us know that as well, and we can go and track that down. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some next steps for the following meetings. Couple housekeeping things again, if you're unaware, out that door to the side is the restrooms, as well as there's a water fountain out there. So feel free to get up and leave as we go throughout this. We had about 70-ish people signed up. Looks like we have around 30 to 40 right now, which makes this next part a little bit easier. But if we can, in your quick 30-second or less, so we don't spend a ton of time. If you could just say who you are and who you're with in the area. So kind of what your name is and who you represent, either as a business, as an entity, etc. And we'll just start here at my bottom left and work our way as a snake down to the back. But I'll kick us off in my team. So again, for those who aren't aware, my name is Anthony Armstrong. I'm the Director of Planning and Development Services for the City of College Station. We'll be leading this effort for the city. We also have a lot of members of my staff, my team. They have been busting their butts to get a lot of this information as much as 10 minutes ago. So they have been working very hard behind the scenes, doing a lot of work to get some information and maps and stuff for us to look at this afternoon and certainly going forward. They represent our long-range planning team, our assistant director, transportation mobility coordinator, and we've got some support staff over there as well. We also have representatives from city manager's office who are here to side. So representatives of our city leadership are here as well. And throughout the crowd and on the committee are various members of council and P&Z, and they'll probably say that here in a second when we do introductions. But with that, we can start over here. Awesome. So again, if you're a couple members or names I didn't recognize from the committee, but if you are interested, let me know as we go forward. Again, these are all public meetings, so anyone is welcome to participate or be purview to them. But really, those in the conversation, we want to be those members of the committee that are going to get all the information, have all that data at their fingertips, and kind of talking with each other back and forth. And so on the screen has been the agenda for this afternoon here, and so we're going to kind of just dive right into it. Again, super informal. So ask questions as we go. And yeah. So some quick data on Northgate is just the demographics. So might be a little harder to see than we imagined up there. And again, we'll send this to you. But in general, the population of Northgate has definitely been growing. So this area has seen a population around 5,000 or so back in 2010, and we're broaching right below 10,000 now as the years go on. Again, as you can imagine in this area, 99% of them tend to be renters, and most of it, 85%, are non-family. So most of the residents in this area, generally speaking, are probably going to be your student living. The household number is the number of units. It is not representative of the number of beds. The number of beds in Northgate probably hovers right around, in Northgate proper, is right around 11,000. When you take into account Century Square, you're probably adding another 400, I believe. And then certainly there's a university housing on the Hensel Park site as well. And then North Point Crossing has, I think, in the ballpark of 800 or so beds in that. Again, here's some information on the kind of age of the area. So again, this is looking at the whole area, not just Northgate as a whole. So if we go back to the original map, when we talk about this whole area, we'll talk about each of them individually. When we talk about the plan as a whole, and definitely open to a different name if that's easy for the group to identify, but when we talk about the Northgate Small Area Plan, it's this entire area. There's Northgate proper, which is kind of the existing city zoned Northgate, and we'll go over the zoning later on. And then obviously Hensel Park, Century Square, North Point Crossing, again, to kind of orient you as we go through. Yeah. Yeah, so the committee isn't necessarily a selection. It's just those who signed up. So if you gave me your email, you gave me your name and wanted to be on the committee, you're on it. It's pretty much that easy. It isn't a selection committee. It's not like a typical council committee or an appointed body. We're really just, this is a very open and public process. We're not looking to have, applications or appointments, things like that. And so this group, this initial group that starts today, and those that we have on the list, that maybe weren't here in person today, but certainly those on the list right now, and anyone in the room who hasn't, who wants to sign up, you're on the committee going forward. You can certainly fall off if other things come up, or if you want to get your voices heard another way. People are welcome to, this information as well as the next presentation will be available online, so they'll be able to see all this information as well as what's on the website, and anyone can provide comments. At the next meeting, we'll be bringing a lot of those comments back to this group, and throughout the process with each various topics, and we'll go over that schedule at the end. But the various topics will provide kind of the feedback that is pertains to that topic when we get there for the sake of discussion. Again, so this is just some basic demographic information for you guys to kind of have and observe. And we'll send this out to you. Not a whole lot to necessarily talk about outside the population. Certainly this area has boomed a lot. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that we've all witnessed in general, both from a commercial standpoint. We've had a lot of boom with things being built in Century Square, et cetera. And then also certainly the population when you see all the high rises and things like that that have gone in. So this is the city's comprehensive plan. So back in 2009, the city enacted the current comprehensive plan. In essence, it's a 20-year plan that the city looks at to, and this is what we base development. This is what we based our water sewer infrastructure, our roadways, et cetera. And so this is the city's long-term vision from a land use perspective in this area. So what that means is land use is not necessarily your individual zoning districts. So we're not talking about we want commercial here, residential here, et cetera. It's kind of more of a feel, if you will. And so generally speaking, this entire area, minus the land owned by the university, the city has on the comprehensive plan as urban center. So what does that mean? Urban center is essentially designated as a very walkable, bikeable environment. So it's intended to be an area that people can live, work, play, all in the same vicinity. So you're essentially trying to get all of your amenities, all of your living needs in one area. It's less automobile focused. It would be more pedestrian focused. And again, this is a 20-year vision from 2009 and some updates along the way. We're actually about to start an update on it right now. But again, you can kind of see that some of this has happened when you look at what Northgate was 20 years ago and what we're getting to now. There is a lot more of this denser development. So in general, also defined within this area, and it's a little harder to see, but there's black outlines around essentially both of the areas shown in red. And those are considered redevelopment areas. So similarly, if you saw the previous presentation, back in the early 90s, Northgate proper was designated as a slum and blight zone, so it's come a very long way since then. It's been designated, and the city has pumped in a lot of resources to redevelop that area and help revitalize it. Obviously, you've been around for a long time. You know what used to be on the Century Square property, kind of older university housing that's been torn down, redeveloped into some modern commercial uses, and we'll go over some figures on them here in a little bit. North Point Crossing, of course, with the old Plaza Hotel and all that got demoed some years back and redeveloped into some denser development over there. So again, when we look at the area, almost the whole area of planning area is about 330, give or take, acres. So about half of that is what the city has zoning control over, and we'll go a little bit more into zoning and not zoning to kind of talk about who can put their hands in the cookie jar where kind of thing. You've also got Texas A&M, who's about another half of that, and so everything that is in that beige color or lighter color is property that is owned by Texas A&M or the system. So that includes Hansel Park, that includes Century Square, the Sharp Center, I think their Youth Center Apartments is the name off across street. But all of that land is owned by Texas A&M University. And so when you talk about a regulatory standpoint, the city does not do permitting and inspections, et cetera. So those of you who own property or bars in the city or in Northgate or North Point Crossing, you obviously go through the city for permitting process. When it comes to university land, they are the state. So the state supersedes over the municipal level with the city, and they kind of do their own processes internal for that property there. This map shows existing land use. So this essentially we take a look at the property and what is it being used for today. So obviously, again, a big chunk of this is A&M, which is why we've asked them to kind of join us in this process as we go through the planning effort and how do we combine all the different elements. Certainly being 160 acres of the planning area is a good chunk, right? Right around half or so. So we definitely want to see how we can coordinate with them, and then also how do we interplay with that, because they do represent a large majority of this overall area. The next highest is just kind of in descending order of the type of use. And so multifamily is obviously the biggest. Multifamily would be described generally as having 3 or more units in a structure. So a single family home, or a duplex would not be considered multifamily. The second you get anything like a triplex and above, that would be designated as a multifamily structure. That includes the high rises all the way down to a couple of lots that do have triplexes, fourplexes, et cetera. Yes, ma'am. questions. I think is IT still over there? Can we get a microphone set up? Not now, but just for future. Or sorry, now, but as in, I don't need it immediately now, but for us to use in a second, can you get a microphone? Perhaps we can just hand that out. I don't think someone wants the microphone that's run through my shirt. Okay, we'll keep going. And again, to answer or talk more to Melissa's question, again, there are some different master plans that we see come out every now and then, right, from the different areas. And so we do try to incorporate that into our planning efforts as well on how do we kind of match up with that too. And so certainly having conversations like this, and if we can get a lot of people on the same page, will be helpful in the future. So again, I think some people have had some time to stare at this, so I'm not going to go through all of the details, but a lot of this talks about, obviously the biggest part of this area overall is A&M. We then have a lot of heavy multifamily presence, commercial retail. On the map, that it will be slightly difficult to show is that in some of these multifamily structures, they're mixed-use structures. I'm sure there are a lot of thoughts, and we'll have very passionate discussions about mixed-use structures in the near future. But there are certainly some where, like North Point Crossing, right, had a large piece that was commercial on the bottom. Generally speaking, it's all residential primarily, and there's not too much commercial existing inside those buildings. And something like North Point Crossing actually just got reduced a pretty significant amount, where there's only, I think, 3,000 or so square feet of commercial kind of in that entire large multifamily complex. Yeah, from a land use perspective, with zoning, it is permanently reduced. They can come in and request to add more back. I would say in our community, holistically, that will never happen. That's a pipe dream, maybe. Generally speaking, multifamily is very easy to sell in this community. We have a lot of need for it from a student perspective, and commercial. There's a lot of, and I'm sure people on the committee can kind of have some more information on this, but I think there's a lot of spaces for commercial, and that particular one they didn't deem as viable. But yeah, they certainly, if things change completely, they can come back and they can add more, and that would be a request to council, so they can't do it by right. And then we'll talk a little bit about zoning, what that means. But by right now, they can only do about 25% of one building as commercial. In a very simplistic form, yes, because what they got rid of commercial, they're now adding as residential. From people staying in an area, yes, you're going to have population density there, but by the same token, commercial can also bring density, just more of a transient nature versus you're staying there, right? But still some level of traffic. And so now we'll talk about zoning. So zoning in this area is a little unique. So again, when we talk about the university as a whole, the city designates the property as being college and university. Essentially what that means is it's just designated for the land use map where A&M owns property holistically. And so we don't have our zoning laws don't take into effect on those properties. So something like a building built in Century Square, even though it's a land lease, right? And they're doing it, the university doesn't have total maybe control over that master plan. They don't have to follow the city regulations. They'd follow whatever the university might have outlined with them in an agreement. When we look at the other two areas, so North Point Crossing in the bottom right, the black is called a PDD. So PDD is a plan development district. It's a very specific type of zoning district where, in essence, someone takes a base of some other district within the city. Every district has a set of rules. And so a very simplistic form, it's a set of rules related to height, setbacks, types of uses allowed in that area, et cetera. They take that base. They then say, we want to make a couple of modifications. We'll add a couple of things. And in doing so, they have to give a layout. So anything that's a PDD has a very specific layout that they are held to. So going back to your question, some other zoning districts might have some, a base zoning might have some flexibility. A PDD is very rigid. So it has a very specific outline of what the property will look like, what will be on it. It's a good tool for both sides of the equation, both the city council and the developer. The developer can maybe ask for a couple of things that he wants that don't quite meet the letter of the code, but they're not necessarily bad things. They're innovative, they're different, and the council gets they get to see exactly what's going to be put on the ground. So as your representatives, they're there to see exactly what will be placed in that spot. When we talk about Northgate proper, so everything on the left-hand side, a while back, I think in 2003, there was the districts were created. So there's NG 1, 2, and 3. So core Northgate, transitional Northgate, and residential Northgate. You can see them all there. In essence, there is a Northgate's called a design district. So back when we did this first initial planning effort for Northgate, part of that came out with the design district to help make Northgate what the city wanted it to be, or what the city council and what the community wanted it to be at that time. And so there are various regulations that are a little bit different in Northgate proper versus the rest of the city. Things like architectural elements, features that are required, certain building materials are required in Northgate versus the rest of the city that actually can't be required. There's height restrictions, there's the sidewalk requirements are expanded. There's a couple of different things that stick out. And so again, this is just a breakdown of acreage of those areas to give you an idea when we get to future conversations to talk about if the committee saw that maybe there's different regulations or changes that they would like to see from a zoning district, or what we can do with zoning perspective, gives you an idea what that impact could be, right? So when we talk about the whole area, what those changes actually have, and will it have a meaningful impact or not, or how much does it really change the area overall? So when we talk about housing, so the number of housing units in the area holistically, the graph on the right kind of shows that. So again, that's number of units, not necessarily number of bedrooms. On the bottom right, you can see where it's broken down, generally speaking, you can kind of equate that to bedrooms, right? Because most of this area is probably going to be your multifamily living. So by and large, we see a lot of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units in these different units. But a household for this slide, if you built a high-rise, 1 room could have 5 beds, but it's 1 unit. So just to keep that in mind as you kind of take in this data and look at it. Again, when we talk about when it's been built, I think it's pretty telling. So again, it's been in the last 20 years or so, you've seen some tremendous growth in the area, with 50% of all the housing units being built in the last decade, the last formal decade, not the last necessary decade, more than that in the last decade. Then again, in the bottom right, this is all based off of census data. So certainly your mileage will vary from time to time, but about 85% is occupied and 15% vacant, according to the 2020 census. Great. For Northgate, okay, Northgate proper. Awesome. Did everyone hear that? And as we go through this process, if you all want to share stuff with the committee that might be good information like that, if you want to send that to me, we're more than happy to send that out to the group. Certainly don't want just people blasting random emails back and forth. I don't think anyone's going to do that. We got around the room giving our names and emails, or names and places, very easily, a lot better than other efforts we've done. So this should be pretty easy. But as we go through the process, if you have information you want to share, certainly most of this conversation, especially after today and the next meeting, will really be on the committee to have. We'll kind of give you prompts as we go about that, but a lot of the conversation will be amongst this group, and we'll take that and generate something. So we talk about shared spaces. So what are some community spaces within the area as a whole? Obviously, Hensel Park. And again, as we talked in the previous presentation, and as Peter mentioned a little bit ago, they are looking to keep Hensel Park and to redevelop it. And there's been things proposed to the regents on that before, or more recently last year. And so looking to, what will that do for the area as far as a youth, more activated and used space. But we also, in Northgate proper, we've got Northgate Park, which is a city-owned park, city-owned property. Everything that is in the kind of beige color is a religious institute. So stepping back a second, similar to A&M, religious institutions can go in any zoning district in the city. So when we talk about zoning, it does restrict, that it'll say that it needs to be a mixed-use structure, it needs to be commercial, it needs to be residential, et cetera. Churches are exempt from that piece. They can go anywhere by right, and that's kind of that separation of church and state stuff. And so churches do have a little bit more leeway in the ordinance as far as how they can develop and where they go. They have to meet certain requirements of the zoning districts, but generally speaking, they have a lot more flexibility as well. So again, everything that's in that kind of beige color is a church-owned property. That also means that there aren't property taxes gained from that property as well, because it is a church. So when you look at the area, that's another thing to take into consideration. Obviously, as well as the parkland area isn't taxable either. There's the shared space for the promenade. I can't say it the other way, so I'm gonna go with that for now so they can stop making fun of me. But the promenade is the area shown in blue, which was a common space built by the city several years ago to help kind of revitalize, basically close down Patricia Street and then make it an active pedestrian corridor. You've got the police substation currently located in the green, so that's currently where the Northgate operations for police and fire on occasion when needed go and operate out of in the area. You can also see just in general the historic properties. So when we talk about historic property, back in the 90s, the city did, I think in conjunction with A&M actually at the time, did a study where they looked at several buildings across Northgate proper, identified them as basically historic structures. When we made that design district that I talked about, there was a list in there essentially of all the historic structures. And if you wanted to alter what the historic structure looked like, you had to go through a pretty rigorous process. So if anyone has tried to do that, you know it's a pretty rigorous process. However, there's a very unfortunate loophole in the fact that if you demoed the building, it didn't count. So if you demoed it and tore it to the ground and redeveloped it as the area maybe intended, you didn't have to follow those same requirements. But if you were using the same existing structure, trying to mess with it in some way, you had to go through this process. So a good example of someone who's done that actually is the credit unit building did a little bit of modifications, and it actually isn't that far off of the original, but even the fact that it's not that far off the original, they still had to go through a rigorous process to get that approved. And a lot of it's mainly like colors, things like that. The credit union building on University. Another one is the old Antonio's Pizza, rest in peace. But the new pizza joint out there now, it is a very small change. They went from a canopy with windows, I think below to now above, or reverse, one or the other. And that required the same process. And so when we looked at and did the study from an architectural standpoint, it identifies various structures throughout the area, and those were deemed as wanting to keep their historic nature. That being said, these are historic from the city's ordinance perspective. They're not historic from like the Texas Landmark Association or a national registry. So when we talk about protections for them, they're limited in what the ordinance allows. They're not protected by a state or federal level. And so again, when we talk later on about different buildings, and you'll notice that a large part of kind of that sub area of one that we've talked about, old buildings like the Dixie Chicken or the Corner or that strip along College Main. Some of them are in there, some of them are not. And so if that's something that the committee sees as wanting to preserve, you'll have to have that conversation on, does that mean increased enforcement? Does that mean that there's additional regulations set on these properties by the city to help hinder that redevelopment? Or what processes does the committee want to look at to help protect those, if that's the envisionment? Going on, we're going to talk about some public safety data. So this is a heat map. This is the heat map on the right is obviously the pretty picture to look at. That is your fire and EMS calls in the last 5 years. So this is for the whole area. A couple of notes, there is police data on here as well. Not in a heat map form, but just shows you kind of the percentage of incidents out there. Now, a couple caveats. The fire and EMS data, College Station responds for A&M for fire and EMS. When we talk about police, it's a little bit more split. It would be, they have their own police force, right? They don't have their own fire force. And so there's still a large amount of calls within Century Square. There are still calls responded to by CSPD, but it is significantly less because they have their own enforcement over there. Again, this heat map shows call responses. So this is When fire and EMS, when they respond, where are they responding to? So these are geolocated. So this is based off of the call and location of X incident. And so the total count for the Northgate area as a whole is about 9,500. Again, you can see kind of sporadically throughout the entirety of the zone, certainly a heavy presence down in the active dense area of the zone. And so about 2/3, give or take, of those calls are kind of in the sub area 1, the Northgate proper kind of bar area. Yes. So the police substation is at Church and Stasny. So if this actually works. So right now the city leases a space from St. Mary's, but it is right in there. So the police substation right now is essentially located right there due to where we were able to get a lease space. And that's where PD responds out of. Oh, that doesn't show up for you. Yeah. So those calls are going to be fire and EMS. That's going to be called in, could be either, could be from, it's going to be when the fire department is called out to the area, and that could be either from PD if that's a dispatch call, or it could be from a citizen. Right. Sure. Correct. Yeah. And so the police data, we still got to kind of, and we can get that more aggregated and sent out. But there is certainly, yeah, there's a call and then a response. So a lot of that for the fire and EMS, right? There's a call if someone calling in, that's a 6,000. The response is 3,500 of those are essentially they were already there. Yeah. Oh, caps left me. So I would say, I mean, EMS is going to generally come when someone is needing medical assistance. Fire could be. Oh, yeah. So when they respond, it's really both of them. They both show up, generally speaking. So when fire gets called out, they are generally both showing up. Both a fire truck and an EMS truck generally show up to all calls. But it's not, fire and EMS is kind of a collective group, I would say. It's the number of fires in the area is not nearly that much. We'll go over there and come this way. Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. Yes. You're good. You're probably loud enough. Oh.
I know are differentiate, but like when
It can be, yeah.
there's probably 100 of those at night.
Yeah.
Is there any way we could get
Yeah, and I think we've got a list of the aggregated data that we can certainly send. This is just to try to collect responses. And this is just this isn't pointing a finger on what the cause is. It's just saying where a resource is going. So we're not trying to say. So that's calls in this whole area. So again, that's looking at the whole district is that 9,500. So everything on this map is a total of 9,500 calls for the last 5 years in this area. So it's not saying that the bar district, right, caused 9,500. That's saying this whole area caused that many. Right. Correct.
Yeah, if I could just clarify, so the calls is the 6,000 number. So if someone calls, that's where it gets logged. A response is how much of our resources respond to it. So it may be one call, but it takes 2 fire and EMS units that have to respond. Does that help?
That the call volume would be different because that would then go into either fire or police. So once you make a call to 911, it would be designated to which one responds. Yeah, there's definitely not an expert in fire and PD. That's not my purview, I promise. But we can definitely get some more. It sounds like this is of interest, so we can get some more aggregated data of this and send that out to the commission. So when the original at the beginning, kind of laying out all the different demographic data. So this is talking about what is out there, what kind of resources is the city spending in this area, and this is really just about that. So when we talk about this area as a whole, where are we spending our resources, and where are we sending information? This is that. Correct. Julie? And just for those who didn't hear, we have all this data broken down, and it was kind of given to us en masse in the last week. And so this is just kind of aggregating the data, but we'll break that out and kind of send that out in more of a table format, and that might be easier to kind of digest. And so then we talk about activity and resources. So this is the redevelopment. So again, the previous slide was more on the city's public resources going into the area. This is the private resources going into the area. So this is a map in the last 20, no, this is since 94 that we ran this, I believe. So this is all the permitting activity that we've seen across the area, and then the ones that we don't get permits on. So things like A&M, just things that we visually were able to determine, obviously, or we know that recently redeveloped. So we added those in manually. But when we look across on the left-hand side, this is just applications. So I'll give a quick summary of what all these mean. So a development permit just means someone came in and wanted to build something in the area. It's typically like could be a sewer line, a water line, some sort of infrastructure piece. It's not necessarily a new building. We've had 13 of those. A pre-application conference just means that people are interested. So they can come talk to the city about an idea. They want to do something. So again, in the last several years, we've had about 64 of those. And generally that's going to be either in North Point Crossing or in Northgate proper would be where those get generated. Rezonings are pretty rare over here. Generally, I think all but one of those, would be actually from North Point Crossing itself. Like that one development came in with those 3 applications. The other one was a small cleanup item that happened where that new high rise at the corner of Welburn and University is going in. TxDOT sold them back some land. Obviously, that land wasn't zoned because it wasn't owned by any private property owner. It got rezoned. That was that one. Correct. Yes. Unless it expired or they never completed it, the application, it's on here. It goes back to 94, 99. Correct. Or to date, current. Ran this morning. So site plans 53. That's when someone comes in to redevelop. That would be every high rise when they submit a permit. It could be a high rise, could be if a bar wants to expand, it could be the new St. Mary's Church. All those had to come in and do a site plan application with the city. So across this area in general, we've seen 53 sites basically develop. That doesn't mean necessarily individual properties because you can combine properties and consolidate those. So, a couple of these high rises might have consolidated 3, 4, or 5 properties and came in as one application. Sure. Yeah, and we can probably get triage, I would say the overwhelming majority is in the last 20 years, 10 to even 10 to 15 years at best. There wasn't a whole lot of permitting going on until towards the end of the 90s, and then certainly around 2010 is when we started seeing a big boom in Northgate proper for sure, and certainly in the last decade is when stuff like Century Square kind of came online and popped out too. So certainly most of this is probably in the last 15 years. I think when we had run the numbers to 2015 and they were 90% of what this number was, and we just ran it back till the original Northgate plan in the late 90s to just capture what had all happened since the original plan back then. But again, 90% of these numbers were the last since 2015. Yeah, so a development permit is going to be something that's not necessarily like a site. So I don't want to build a structure necessarily. I just need to build, a piece of infrastructure that's off-site or a sidewalk, it's kind of a minor thing. Permits, so when we talk about permits, the thing under reviews is going to be something that goes through the planning and engineering component of the city. So that's talking a lot more about your public infrastructure piece and kind of that public facade look. Permits are going to break down into the actual building itself. And so across the area, we've had 89 demo permits. So again, you pull a demo permit essentially anytime that they're demoing a individual structure that gets a demo permit. Then we've got development permits is on there twice. Ignore that one. New residential construction and multifamily construction. So these are a new residential construction is going to be truly like a single family or duplex style home. And that one's going to be kind of in this cul-de-sac where it says Dogwood. There's a couple of small kind of existing a couple of small existing single family-esque or duplex style structures back there. And so that one actually is a little bit older. Most of what's been built in the area is multifamily. The commercial construction one is slightly misleading in the title because of how the permit system is set up. If a high-rise comes in, because it's a mixed-use structure, it is actually coded as a C new permit or a commercial new permit because we don't do a lot of high-rises in the city, but we do an awful lot of commercial. And so about 9 of those, I believe, 9 to 10 are going to be mixed-use structures out of that 18. The rest of them are going to be different commercial structures. Something like St. Mary's would have fallen under a commercial structure, for instance. So those types of things that have been built in the area over time. Remodels, that's when they do not tear down the existing structure, but they're in essence acting within the space. So across since the original plan, a little over 100 remodels. So certainly, even if people aren't demoing or building new, there's certainly been revitalization of existing structures throughout the area from the private development. And everything that has remodeled that might be existing, you can see them in the purple. So something that is if they improved it, added onto it, renovated it, but didn't demo it down, it's going to be in that purple color on the screen. Everything else is going to be something that completely ripped down and built new. And then the one caveat would be the Traditions, the large Traditions building. It built new and then it added on, so it's on there twice. But the way that the mapping shows up, it's a little covered up. And then variances. So when we talk about, again, if someone wants to not follow the standards that are laid out in the ordinance, generally speaking, most of the variances we see in this area are for height. And so it'll come up, I'm sure, about the high rises, right? And kind of the large height and what that does to the area. So in Northgate, there is no height restriction for the city side. The sky is the limit with an asterisk. So the asterisk is the airport. So the airport has their own, the city adopted an ordinance through the airport that basically says if you're above 470.6 feet in elevation for the top of your building, that's bad. And you've got to go through them first. And so they have to go to FAA, they have to go to the airport, to the system, and get permission because the system owns the airport. They have to go through and get permission from all those entities, and they come forward to the city and say, hey, all these people are good with it. If we do X, Y, Z, or without doing X, Y, Z, they're good with these particular high points. And if all those entities agree, it goes to the ZBA for the city, and theoretically actually could still be denied, but generally it meets the letter of the law at that point for the application and it gets approved. But we've seen a number of those. So I think about when we, in high rises, it depends on how you define it. We usually probably look over 7 stories would be a high rise. When you talk about the big tall ones, the rise is, I think, the only kind of large high rise out there that doesn't have this height variance. So all the rest of them did go to did go to FAA, to the airport, to the system, et cetera, got this exception to build beyond that kind of max elevation. And some of them is upwards of 200 feet above that number. And so again, when we talk about in the future, when y'all want to discuss kind of different regulation things, if that isn't the envisionment of the community and the council, and there wanted to be a cap of X, I mean, there's different options on there on what that could look like. I think the city's stance from an area of the response has definitely been told at different council meetings in the past as far as kind of it. The question was, showing the slide, does the city envision that with future development, is it going to decrease? And I would say that generally speaking, if you're adding more people, there's certainly more opportunity, but I think the city's acted as responded in the past from the chief's perspective has come out that it is more of a, in an area, there is a behavioral issue at play. And certainly if you're adding more people to an area, that could add more people with a behavioral issue. But I think as development overall, I think the heat map could stay the same as far as where the frequency of occurrences are happening, but it might increase the number of occurrences. But also if you got more development, you have more property taxes, potentially pay for those resources to counteract that. So it could be a zero-sum game at the end of the day, where as you increase development and you increase activity in the area, as long as they're paying for themselves, maybe there's no loss. Right, the types of uses could impact that, what's going in there. But yeah, I think generally, in my opinion of this map, it is a behavioral issue being shown of an area, not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean uses. It doesn't mean what's built on the ground. I think it's more of how are those all interplaying with each other.
Excuse me.
Yeah, sorry, they can't hear us online.
Sorry to get in the weeds or whatever again, but on this data here, would it be a huge lift to, get some of these numbers over time, trends, and, when was demolition a trend? Are we trending up on demolition? Are we trending up on remodeling? Are we trending up on new construction?
Yeah, we can definitely turn this into more of like a line graph style thing that shows kind of the number of counts per year. Everything that we have for these permits is a permit number by year, so we could certainly break that out and kind of do it in that regard.
Anthony, I do have a clarification. One of your staff members, I won't say who, didn't update this chart. She's wearing maroon, but we won't talk about it. These numbers are actually from 2015 to 2024.
Oh.
We do have the other numbers, but it's just not on this chart. This is from 2015.
2015
but yes,
to
we can
4.
get the rest of it. Yes, 2015.
Yeah, we can certainly break it up more. That's easy and send that. Any other questions on this one before I move forward? So infrastructure investment. So this is, again, we talked about a little bit last time in terms of what public dollars from the city have gone into the area. So the right-hand side, again, is a copy from the Northgate district plan that was recently retired last year or sunsetted last year, and shows all the projects that were completed as a part of that plan. And when we look at the total amount of dollars spent into this area, part of it, so there's kind of annual expenditures for the Northgate division that are highlighted there at about 1.7 block grant funds that have been put into the area from community development, and then capital projects in the recent times for about 12 million. We talked a little bit last time about the facade improvement program. So this is a grant program back that started in 1996 with the first application, and this was the city working with those private businesses to help redo their facades and kind of bring them up to date, or kind of help facelift them a little bit to help with some of that deterioration that had occurred just naturally over time. And then this is a map, kind of high level, of the appraised value. So this isn't each individual property, but this talks about the appraised value per acre. So the more red the color is, the higher property value per acre that it is. And so it's broken down into different tiers. The first two tiers are based, so anything more or less in green is anything under about $1 million to $2 million in appraised value. And so we'll go into kind of some more deeper dive in a second here on some of the economic data, but this is just looking at the area holistically, what pays property taxes. One key thing to point out here is, again, the churches don't necessarily, they don't pay property taxes. Now, one thing that is, I think, somewhat a misconception in the community is that Century Square does actually pay property taxes, but they pay it on the improvements. So they don't pay it on the land because the land is owned by A&M, but they do pay property taxes to the city on the improvements that they build on the land. So there is still something that comes into the city from a property tax standpoint in Century Square area.
What does that look
Good question. Next slide.
Repeat the question.
The question was what that looked like. So this map breaks that down a little bit more in detail. And so the left-hand side shows the Northgate district specifically. So this is Northgate proper. So the residential property tax generated to the city is the lighter line. The darker line is what's generated by commercial. And so this is specifically the O&M rate. So when we talk about money, the tax rate is split into two, right? So there's the O&M rate and the debt rate. About 60% of the tax rate goes towards O&M. The other rest of it goes to debt services. O&M is what pays for the police officers, the firefighters, me, so keep that up. Me, all the rest of the staff, most of the ongoing maintenance for the city and funds that the city can use year over year is in that O&M budget. So it's about 30 cents per 100. So the left-hand side again is properties specifically within the Northgate district and what they generate. So right now we get a little under 1.9 million in O&M budget out of the residential uses in Northgate. So that's the high rises, the various other multifamily uses, et cetera, in there. And the commercial properties generate about 150 or so. And so on the right-hand side, top right is the commercial specifically. So this is broken down by each sub area within the plan. So the first one at the top is Century Square. Obviously, again, as they've developed and added more, the built improvement brings revenue to the city, but the existing land does not. So if the land cost goes up, doesn't necessarily matter for the city. If the improvements are built, it does add value to the city. Northgate has stayed, again, this is since 2019, has stayed relatively consistent throughout the years as far as commercial property taxes. There hasn't been a whole lot of commercial development. Obviously, if you've been around the area, it's primarily been student living being built and invested into the area by the private market. North Point Crossing, again, has been fairly consistent. The dip is more or less around COVID and some of the roll of beer stuff. And then they did have some commercial space still left, but it really hasn't, what they've just recently gotten rid of was never occupied necessarily to begin with. So not a whole lot of change there. And Hensel Park doesn't have anything necessarily on it. So again, we look at residential. This is the last 5 years, but again, just showing kind of the trend of what the revenue toward the city looks like. So again, this is where the city gets money in the area to help pay specifically from property taxes. There is sales tax information as well, right? And so there's certainly the commercial, this is commercial property taxes. This doesn't include their sales tax information. Making sure we have. Which we do have some of that, but I can send that in a separate file. Or no, it's the next one I led. Sorry. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think it's
Can you
connectivity, but also
repeat the question,
uses.
please?
Yeah, so the question was why, again, why is the boundary for the small area plan so large, basically? Probably a good summary of the question. So, and not just over Northgate proper. I think because in conversation with the council and kind of from their direction, there is a lot to gain from a community standpoint out of Century Square specifically, as far as the amount of commercial development, even their office and multifamily and hotel spaces. You know, if they build a large hotel, it doesn't make sense for the city to say, oh, we want a hotel over here, right? That you might have things competing with each other. And so making sure that we look at this area, which is very interconnected, but maybe a little bit disjointed at the moment, we want to make sure that we're taking all those factors into account. Because if you've got a lot of commercial presence being generated from the land at Century Square, things happening at Hensel Park or North Point Crossing, it will have an effect on what happens over at Northgate. And if there is a ton of residential being built over at Northgate and none over in Century Square, that'll have an effect. So how do they interplay with each other is definitely part of the question. Certainly connectivity is the biggest thing, because we want to make sure that as this area development, we don't have silos, because that doesn't help anybody. And then you have these little kind of micro silos popping up along University Drive, which won't be helpful. I don't know if that answers the question.
Up with or run into. Oh, I'm sorry. So I just wondered, is that still on the table where we can focus in on one, not just combine all numbers and
Right.
percentages the same?
Yeah, so I think, so yeah, the question is, can we still get down to talk about, I guess, really the, district areas or small areas or sub areas? So like we talked about the first time, there is a sub area identified within the plan that we will spend more time on as we go through the discussions. But again, doing this plan effort, we will start big and kind of work our way in and eventually kind of end with that sub area 1, because you want to know how it interconnects with all the rest of what we've talked about. And so the information today is overarching, broken down by the different kind of 4 main areas that we've identified that have kind of their own key zones, if you will, kind of easily identifiable zones, and then providing information that we have on that. And certainly this is drinking from a fire hose, for lack of a better word. So certainly we'll send this out after this to the committee. And as you have questions, feel free to let us know, and we can either dive deeper into certain aspects or try to find additional information that we can find. And then again, if there are members of the committee, because we did ask for certain entities to be here that are key stakeholders in this process, if they have information that they would like to share or provide, we're welcoming that as well to be a part of this process too. So again, going back to the kind of sales tax and property tax aspect. So this is the trend line from 2019 to 2024 of sales tax generated in the area on the left-hand side. The right-hand side shows hotels available in the area. So when we talk about sales and mixed beverage tax, so obviously as Century Square has grown, their sales tax has increased. As they've been successful, it's increased. And Northgate's it has increased, but it's kind of, it has not been surpassed by Century Square as far as total sales tax and mixed beverage tax generated from that area. And again, this is Northgate as in the entirety of the 150 acres that make up Northgate proper, not just the bar district. It is all of it. Granted, most of it is certainly in that kind of sub area 1. And again, we can get an idea of what are the hotels in the area and how do they interact with the surrounding system. Pretty easy. Any questions on this one? So now we'll talk a little bit about the connectivity existing information. So this is the city's existing thoroughfare plan in the area. So any solid line is a line that is built to its functional classification today. So in short, we don't need to do anything with it per the thoroughfare plan from a city standpoint. If it is dashed, it means that there is still parts of it that need to be improved or generated, whether that be reconstructed to be its full cross-section or rerouted. So in reality, when we look at this, you basically see that there are a couple of reroutes on the thoroughfare plan that are currently proposed to help realign certain roadways within the area. All the existing streets essentially would not be rehabbed to be larger or smaller. Yes, ma'am. We will touch on that. So yeah, the question was, does this include any bike or ped components? That's the next slide. Sorry, we'll get there. But there are standard cross sections for each roadway. Again, that would be if we build a new one. And again, this is on the city thoroughfare plan, which matches the comp plan. So again, this 20-year output plan.
Yeah, I guess I was more concerned about, in plan view, is there anything that accommodates destinations where pedestrians and bicycles can get to these areas and use it as a mode of transportation instead of just focusing on the roadway itself?
Yes, and we'll cover there. The next slide or two will kind of cover that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So again, this is the bicycle plan, and the next one will be the pedestrian plan. And so this is, again, when we look at Northgate, in the urban center, the key is for it to be more of a walkable and bikeable environment. There'll be a lot more lines on the next slide with the pedestrian plan. This is a proposed current bicycle plan for the area. And so again, a solid line means that that particular facility is built. Now, what a facility means for a bike route is either there's a facility would be a bike lane. So there's an actual striped lane or a separated lane potentially for it. It could be a multi-use path. So that's going to be a larger path off the side of the road. So generally larger than, your 5 or 6 foot sidewalk. It's going to be more of that 10 to 12 to 15 foot sidewalk that can be shared by both bicyclists and pedestrians. And then you have in blue are the bike routes. So a bike route is going to be something that is delineated or signed as a bike route, but it might not necessarily have a facility like a bike lane or a elevated sidewalk around it. Yeah.
Corridor, is that what we're calling it? The Northeast Corridor on the other side of, on the issue of transportation and mobility, on the other side of Texas Avenue. Is that zoned or planned for student housing as well?
The Northeast Gateway Plan?
Yes.
The Northeast Gateway Plan does have a similar breakout of land use as this area does. So it's urban center on the comp plan as well for a good majority of that area, especially at the hard corners, which again doesn't necessarily mean student living. It's not designated to that fashion, but in essence, it is intended to be a similar development of multi-story mixed-use structures.
So not to put too fine a point on it, when North Point Crossing got cut off of its natural center private drive by the Century Square Development's parking garage behind the clinic, that not only stopped in its tracks connectivity into North Point Crossing, but at some point those kids are going to have to get across Texas too to get to the high rises that we visualize over there, right?
Right, and that kind of comes back into the city with TxDOT did the university pedestrian improvement project so that there are massive sidewalks, multi-use sidewalks along University Drive. And certainly, as we talked about last time, right, the different kind of pedestrian improvements that could happen with different crossings. But there are very large sidewalks along University Drive to help facilitate that movement of pedestrians kind of at that along the major roadway there. But certainly, yeah, as density comes over there will be people who need to cross that intersection. And so that could be something that comes as part of this planning effort. It could be future conversations where maybe the lights for that intersection are similar to the lights along University Drive, where they all stop for pedestrian movements. Could be an option to look at in the future if there becomes a lot of density there. That's all something that the committee can talk about as we go through that. But yeah, right now University Drive obviously has a heavy pedestrian traffic with the school. But if you're familiar, there are light timing specifically with that to help facilitate the crossing of a large mass of people.
Thank you. I think that's going to be an important connectivity issue going forward, I would think. Thank you.
And another thing to point out, actually a little bit to the councilman's concern and question is grade separations. And so this map does show a number of grade separations proposed. So the grade separations would be something similar to what was shown at the previous meeting with the different crossings at College Main, at Century Square, Polo Field, et cetera. Those kind of elevated crossings where in those particular images, right, the road was dipping down underneath, those crossings are going on top. There's a number of different ways to do that. Could be elevated to where it goes above. But in the plan, we do envision that there are various grade crossings that could help accommodate a pedestrian and bike paths in a different manner than having to full stop traffic, for instance. So this is the current city pedestrian plan. So this is, again, specifically for people not on bikes. This would be just basically your sidewalk network. Same thing applies. So multi-use path is on this map as well because it counts for both, right? So it could be bicycles or pedestrians on it. Anything that's a solid purple line represents something that is constructed. Anything that is dashed does not. And so it still needs to be constructed. A lot of, so things like Tabor and Stasny, a lot of that was actually done by the city. There were some redevelopment projects that were on the previous capital slide where the city came in and redid those streets, added sidewalks, et cetera. Things like the Patricia Street promenade, that's another version. And then certainly as things have come in to redevelop, part of the standards for Northgate is they have to rebuild those sidewalks. And the sidewalks in Northgate are, again, an elevated standard. So when we talk about Northgate proper, there's an 8-foot minimum for a sidewalk up to 12 feet, depending on a couple of contextual things related to the area. And that, again, that standard's on essentially the left-hand side of College Avenue. That standard applies across the board. And then again, the sidewalks shown through Hensel and things they might not be representative of what's actually on the ground. If you've been through Century Square, there's obviously sidewalk connectivity throughout the development that isn't shown on here because it's not necessarily part of the city's long-term pedestrian plan. It was just implemented as part of site development. Yes.
I know.
I keep getting yelled at.
The proposed grade separation, are those ands or ors?
In what regards? As in
Are
bikes
we-
and peds?
Yeah, are we, those grade separations across university, are we proposing 1, 2, and 3, or are we?
Yeah, so this map and what we showed previously are a little different. So the stuff that came out of TxDOT is 4 crossings.
Okay.
And so there's 1.
And so we're proposing them all, not just, can we have one of these?
4 total. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this one and around here. No, sorry, the black circles are the city's pedestrian, bicycle, and thoroughfare plan are everything in a black circle. When you look at what I've added in red, those are from the TxDOT study that was done and what we showed in the last presentation. Those show those kind of different grade separated crossings for, yes, pedestrian and bicyclist. And that would be where, again, the proposal is that the proposal in that study was that the road would go down, and in essence, that grade would be these pedestrian crossings and potentially activatable spaces. The black circles represent things that were proposed on the city's original plan from 2009 for various areas, but certainly as things have progressed and developed, those will change potentially with time. But in essence, they're long-term visions for the thoroughfare plan on where grade separations might be warranted or proposed. I would say the circles in red are a little bit more, that's more recent information, more recent data, and that's stuff where we talked about last time that the city has sent stuff off to the federal government for funding, which we'll see what happens with that with recent news on federal funding, but we've sent stuff in to try to look for funding for that, and certainly working with TxDOT and A&M to make those crossings happen, I think is in everybody's field of view. No, so the study that generated these crossings just came out at a couple of months ago, in essence. There was a study a couple of years ago or several years ago that in essence said, take University Drive, put it underground, have everything be on top, and that was like $1 billion or something crazy, some astronomical amount that would never have happened. And so those same consultants were asked, hey, go do something a little bit more feasible. And so they came back and they brought back these options. And so those are what we've been given recently, and literally as recently, I think before I showed them the very first time, we had gotten it the week before. So it was a very new occurrence that we had gotten those images from the consultant. So it's still in development, certainly not funded, anything like that, but it is far more plausible than the first stab that was generated by TxDOT. Yes.
So is there any specific timeline for this change? I know you kind of mentioned potential changing of the light timing, and that's a huge problem for us in Century Square. That main entrance and exit, it gets really, really backed up. And so would these grade separation proposals allow us to change some of those timing of the lights?
It would certainly allow you to change timings, but this is like, there's no timeline even thought about right now. I mean, there's the funding part. I mean, if there were issues with timing, I mean, getting with TxDOT individually might be on the table to figure that out. But these specific projects for the grade separations, I mean, there is years down the road. I mean, if not a decade plus, probably before you would see even one of them probably come forward as an option.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge daily, because unfortunately, they do not stay on the sidewalks. So,
Sure.
the scooters and the bicycles and whatnot. I was just curious. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And that's another actually good point that she mentioned, and something that as the city is actually right now, we're in the process of redoing or updating what will be now called the Active Transportation Master Plan, which in essence is these last 3 slides. And part of that, one thing that we do want to address specifically, and could be a good talking point for the committee as well in this area, is micromobility. So micromobility is a growing, crazy fad in the area. A fad's not even the right word because it's here to stay for sure. But it has had a big impact on pedestrian safety, access, how far people are willing to go to get to certain things. What is that circle of we used to talk about if something was in a half mile to a mile of where you lived, you might go walk to it. Now you might go as far as 3 miles plus on your little electric scooter to go do the same thing. So it certainly will change the dynamic. It's something that we want to try to address with our master plan update, but certainly is a big point of discussion with this area because again, when we talk about this environment, it's meant to house pedestrians and bicyclists, and what that now includes in today's society is micromobility and different forms of that. Yeah. Yes, we do have that. It was on our to-do list, but we ran out of time. But yes, we will definitely get the bus route cited. So this is related to transportation mobility. This is just a collection of the crash data. So it's from 2015 to 2024, and more of a heat map. And then kind of what was listed as the contributing factor to the crash is outlined on the left. So obviously most of the crashes are happening on the main road at various kind of heavily trafficked intersections that you would all imagine if you're familiar with the area. Just some basic data. Most of them are failure to control speed or yield the right of way appropriately, and then alcohol related, and the list goes on. Crash count. So this again is from 2015 to 2024, a little under 3,000 crashes in the Northgate planning area as a whole, and about a quarter of those resulted in some level of injury. And we've had 4 pedestrian fatalities throughout the area in Northgate, and pedestrian includes bicyclists as well. Yes. It's.
To repeat, the question was, where are the 4 pedestrian fatalities?
They're all on University Drive. I'd have to pull the cross section of what cross street it was. I know they were all on University Drive. I think there was one closer to the McDonald's area, University and Boyette.
We can pull the individual data. We have those points specifically, so we can send those to y'all.
Yeah. Any other questions on this one? Before I go to the next part, are there any questions on existing condition data that you were expecting to maybe see here, that you want to see here? Any information? We've definitely been taking notes on things that people have asked questions on that we can go back and find more on. But are there any components of data specifically that you'd like us to go and dig deeper on right now? If you can also think on it and get back to me by the end of the week, preferably. And again, I'll send this to you so you'll have everything in front of you. You can kind of go through it. But if you have any data that you want to see, let me know. We can chase that down. But does anyone have anything they want to see now they'd like us to look into?
Property taxes, I having trouble squaring up the property taxes. I saw the 150,000 number and I just pulled up my taxes on at the county and so the city of College Station allocation just on my building that I occupy is $11,000 just on one building a year. And then are you counting the CSISD in there? Or is this just city of College Station monies?
So this chart is just City of College Station and just the O&M rate. So this would, so their total taxes that pay to the city on this would be, if you add it, this is 60% roughly. So add another, it would be another 20 cents per 100. So about another, what is that, another 1/3 to this number. So about 200K comes out of Northgate proper to the city in property taxes, but the ISD is not the city. Right, we don't I mean, they have the biggest chunk of your taxes for sure, and that none of that money comes to the city from a property tax standpoint.
Well, the breakdown that I see, 11,000 goes to the city and 5,600 went to ISD, unless I'm got it transposed.
So I think what Anthony is saying is that this shows part of the taxes that College Station charges you. So there's the O&M and the capital. We can present that number together next time because that is revenues of the city, even though one goes to operations and one goes to capital construction in the city. I think it is, these numbers were presented because when you're looking at revenues and expenditures in the area, what we can expend comes on the operations side comes from the O&M. The rest has to go to capital construction. So
Okay, and then the second part of my question is I was talking about the real estate portion initially, but now let's talk about the business property taxes. Are those monies in there from the business property taxes, or does the city get any of that?
I'm not sure what you mean by business.
So
there's a land value and a built improvement value, and that creates your property tax value. So let's say if that's, if that totals to be 100,000, right? The city is getting 51 cents per 100 on that amount. But the ISD, for instance, it sounds like those numbers might be reversed. The ISD is getting 1 point something per 100 on that.
So I'm referring to the business entity that occupies the real estate.
and yes, that money does also go to the city. So the equipment and all those types of things that make up the
Yeah.
business, yes.
Okay,
Right.
and it's in there?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, it's all
gotcha.
one. The numbers that generate this is all one combined number.
Okay, thank you.
Just briefly, just having some stratification in the data to, like Lisa was talking about, the different districts within the district as a whole will help as we're analyzing things, I think.
Additional revenue generation as well. I know that it's not just property taxes and sales taxes and things like that. The city owns property, and do they get rents and do they generate other revenue like the parking lot and things like that?
Yeah, we can include the city does generates revenue from the surface lot and from the parking garage, but we can get those included too. Alcohol tax is included in this one. This is sales and mixed beverage tax.
So one more, sorry. Northgate has two beautiful faces. Is it possible to get a look at, when we look at like the calls or the traffic accidents, could we even get like a rough idea of time of day or something when this happens? Because those are two totally different Northgates. They're both wonderful.
I think most of the data we can probably break out to time. I think some of the others might have to dig a little bit more, but I think we can get some of it. Is that I'll look for a visual consensus, but is anything between like, I don't know what the hours, I was like 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. and then that'd be one segment and then the rest be another segment. General agreeance. Y'all got that?
Was that crash data or emergency response
The
data?
fire, EMS, and then crash data.
All the above.
All the above. Please, pretty please.
And then I think too, with regarding that data, if we could get any data regarding police, just to be separated by like which are actual calls initiated by people in the area versus
Versus the officers.
which are the officers that are entering in different places or going into different areas and then handing out tickets.
Yeah, yeah, you do that. Anything else right now?
On your pedestrian crossing, just a quick question. From Welborn to College is a scramble. Is it that same way to Texas, from College to Texas? Scramble meaning all traffic stops, pedestrians cross?
It is, I believe it's that way from Welborn all the way to Texas.
To Polo, but not Texas
Or
itself.
to Polo. Yeah, so all the way to here.
Okay.
All right, seeing none. So this is just a summary from the first meeting. Just kind of wanted to give this to you guys to kind of sit and mull over and think on. And this is, some of you were here at the last meeting, but if you weren't, quick summary is there are about 100 or so people here, give or take. We had them broken out into 10 different tables. At each of the tables, we had them go through kind of 3 different exercises. The third one isn't on here, but we had them kind of talk about what did they vision, what was their community vision for as a table, what was their vision for Northgate, the area as a whole. And so this shows kind of some key phrases and words that came out of their vision statements for each of the 10 different tables. Again, a couple of key themes. That they wanted to be an entertainment and activity hub. Northgate is an entertainment and business district, balancing nightlife with daytime attractions. It's one thing that they envisioned. Topics around connectivity and walkability, focus on improving walkability and pedestrian infrastructure, historical and cultural identity, emphasis on preserving the area's historical character while accommodating students and growth. One thing that I would like to challenge the committee on is what we heard a lot in the meeting last time was protecting that history, protecting that culture. And I think a lot of us, and someone actually spoke at the council meeting not too long ago and kind of talked about this, but I think if from the city's perspective, getting that defined a little cleaner in terms of what does that mean would be very important to how do we, from a city perspective, how do we help preserve that, right? So we can all walk around and say that we think or we feel or this might be great or whatever, but if we don't really have something that we can point to that is tangible, that has objective material to it that we can help enforce or regulate on, it doesn't really do a lot of good. So like when I talked about the historic structures that had the loophole, if you tore it down, if we want to try to prevent things like that, we need to know what those things are that we're trying to help protect. And so one thing that I would ask for homework, surprise, you've got homework now, again, after all these years. If one thing that I know was a common theme amongst everybody at the table in the community was, what does that historic culture really mean? And so when we talk about that, I think we all have a sense, we all can feel it, but how do we define that? So that'll take a minute, I think, to come up with what that is. But in order for us to help protect that, we need to know what that is. A lot of discussion, again, in the community about housing and development. So certainly getting more housing options, but also making sure that it's a 24-hour district was some discussion. So I think back to the earlier conversation, there's 2 faces, there's 2 different times a day. Right now, obviously, there's a heavy nightlife in Northgate proper. And then how do we help facilitate ongoing interaction throughout the entirety of the area, 24/7 or throughout the day as well. And then certainly what I know a common issue was parking in general. And so again, when we talk about walkable environments, there's a thought to reduce parking or even remove it in some cases. But also we live in Texas and it's hot and some people want to drive their cars, and what does that look like? And so a lot of things to consider there in terms of parking and how to address that concern. but also keeping in mind the vision for what the community wants. And again, at the bottom is a couple of what half roughly of the groups, what their vision statements were. Some groups were a lot easier to come to a consensus on with each other, and some were not so much, but just a little sneak peek on what they've all provided. We're still kind of collecting all that information, and at the next meeting, we'll present a kind of a summary of the feedback from that meeting last week. We'll have 2 weeks this time instead of one, so it'll give us a little bit more. Hopefully, don't get snowed out again. But the couple of different statements there, again, not going to read them to you, but to keep in mind for what those groups, what that community feedback was, to help drive the committee going forward. So as we move forward, again, this was the first kind of committee meeting, so you're on it. Thanks a lot. This is a lot of time and effort as we go through it. This is kind of a phenomenal opportunity, I think, for all of us. I'm not sure I've ever seen all these different walks of lives and backgrounds, et cetera, in the same room having conversations. And granted, I talked this entire time, but we'll get to that where y'all get to talk the entire time and I get to watch instead. But I think it's been a great opportunity for all of us to get together. And so the next several series of meetings will just be this committee that, again, they're open to the public, they can get involved. But the meeting in 2 weeks from now, February 18th, we'll be kind of summarizing all the feedback that we've gotten from the community to date and following up on all the stuff that y'all have asked us for today and had questions on, but as well as if you could get me something by the end of the week. I think all of y'all should have my email contact from the original email. If there's additional information you want to provide to the committee or that you would like us to go research, please let me know and we'll go and dig that up in the next 2 weeks and bring that back to the next meeting. After that, gets into the fun stuff. So that's when we're gonna, y'all are gonna get to duke it out, figure out what you want this plan to look like, figure out what is it that we want for these different kind of main topics as we go through. And if people listening online or people and friends of yours in the community that have interest, again, all of the data necessarily presented will be online and available for anybody. They can provide their comments and that'll eventually make its way to you guys as a committee. They're certainly welcome to obviously get with you individually. On that committee, they can also just come here and be part of the, they will be here in the room, they can observe, but not necessarily part of the conversation. We want to try to make sure that the people that are here today, tomorrow, and then really starting March 4th, that those people are consistent. We want to make sure that the conversation stays the same, that everyone's in the same room having a discussion and able to kind of have those face-to-face interactions. There's, again, multiple opportunities to provide input. So if people have questions or if you want to provide additional input, you can go to the website. The website was thrown up very quickly, but it is quite phenomenal for what they were able to do over there. There's a survey map that you can interact with, and you can actually interact with the actual map itself and drop pins, drop labels, et cetera, provide comments as extensive as you want. You can provide written comments online. You can also email us directly at northgateplan@cstx.gov, or you can email myself and I'll get that feedback as well over to the group. But with that, are there any, yes?
Just one comment. I know it's a little bit disillusioning to sit here in a committee meeting and hear Anthony talk for an hour and a half, as illuminating as it is. This is important, though. I think as we break and we get to listen and observe, it's important to know kind of the state of the union and the tools that the committee will have available to them to implement and advocate for change in the area. It's not something we can just speak into existence. It's something that through thought and planning and management of ordinances, we will be able to create the Northgate we want. So this is basically the foundation of the discussion. This is what is happening there now, the ordinances that are in place, the zoning that's in place. And Anthony, can you add to that? Because again, this piece is critical, but it's probably not what people were expecting to hear today.
Yeah, I would say this. So this meeting, the next meeting are going to be a lot of information, and that's why we're going to make sure to provide that to you so you can kind of digest it on your own. But we want to give you as staff, our job is just to give you the factual information. So we're not here to give you a direction or tell you what to do with that information. We're just here to provide it. Ultimately, once we get to March 4th, we will give you kind of topics that would generate a plan and things that we want to talk about. But at the end of the day, the decision-making pieces and the action points that come out of this plan and what we will present to the council and what they will enact on to go forward will be coming from you guys. So this group will get to make up that plan and what that looks like. We're just here to help provide effort or provide information and put in the effort to put the plan together. But ultimately this, yeah, you guys are going to have a lot more involvement with each other in 2 meetings from now, really, which unfortunately, spoiler alert, I won't be here for that, but you'll be in good hands. I'll make sure of it. But it'll be a time for all y'all to kind of sit around the table and figure out, as Councilwoman McElhaney stated, what you want this area to look like in the future. So with that, I know that was a lot. I just talked to you for almost 2 hours. I need a break, but does anybody have any questions? And if you don't want to sit in front of the group, you can find me after. I work here all day, so come find me. With that, I, again, very much appreciate y'all's time. This is a phenomenal amount of people and engagement. It's not to be said lightly. This is great to see everybody involved and wanting to be as part of this process. So I appreciate all y'all's time being here today, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.